This morning I was thinking about the fact that I get asked about motivation a lot, which, and I talk about it. I mean, I went to Australia to talk about it. I talked about it at GDC, and I never really thought about why people ask me to speak about motivation. And then I thought, well, I must know something about it, which means that I must know how to tap into it. And the truth is I don't. And so when people ask me, like, how do you stay motivated? I talk about all these like tricks, like, well, always leave on a high note, all this nonsense. Well, it's not nonsense. It actually works, but all these little tricks. But then I realized the truth is you just don't stay motivated. No, nobody does. Nobody stays in the pocket all the time.
Well, that's where I was thinking about it earlier this week because I know we're gonna to talk about it today. Like, what is motivation? Like, what do people consider motivation? Like your willingness to get up and do something, your willingness to not procrastinate, your willingness to see something through. Is it all of those things?
I That's a good question. I think probably people only refer to motivation when they don't have it. Like when you're
Sure.
motivated to do something, I don't think you second guess it. You're just excited to do it. And then when you're not motivated, you feel bad about yourself. It's like this. It's almost considered a character flaw. So I had, this is an example I have. I had a student who wasn't doing anything, and I said to her, like, "What's going on with you? You're not doing anything." And she said, "I don't know. I'm just lazy." And I thought about that for a second, and I thought about that word lazy that gets thrown around, and uh, this conclusion I come to, and this is I've had debates, heated debates with people about this, but lazy to me seems like it's just this like social construct, and that's a weird word to use this time of this day and age, but it's like a social construct that is created to make you feel bad about not doing something that you don't want to do. And so
Right.
they say you're just lazy because you won't do this task that sucks. Like, hey, why haven't you taken out the trash? Stop being so lazy. It's like, I'm not lazy. I just lack the motivation to take out the trash because it sucks. It's
Right.
boring. It takes time out of my life and that sort of thing. And so I started thinking about it in those terms of like, well, it's a lack of motivation. So I said to the student, like, she said, I'm just lazy, I guess. And I said, well, I don't really think that you're lazy. You're just not motivated to do this. And so I asked her, what do you like to do? And so she started to tell me what the things that she liked to do. And the common thread was there were things she was good at.
Right.
She liked to do the things she was good at because it's rewarding to her. And when you're learning something new, and this mostly speaks to students, but ultimately can speak to a lot of different people. So when you're learning something new, you're excited at first because it's new, and you dive into it, and you give yourself a little bit of a break. Like if you were to do something like, oh, my dishwasher's broken, and I'm going to try to fix it, you wouldn't beat up on yourself because you were bad at it. But when you dive into something like that you want to be good at, and you start going down that road, and you're excited about it, and you're kind of afraid to do it because thinking you'd be good at something is a lot of times more comfortable than doing it and then improving that you're wrong the whole time. So it's easier for us to sort of sit back and go, you know what, I could have been great. I'm sure that I could have been great. But when you actually apply it, you're like you're sort of like setting the table for like failure. Like you're saying like these are now the parameters of failure for me because I've set out to do something. So I've just like, you know, isolated the parameters of to say like I suck. And that's going to be super painful. But when we get started, we're highly motivated, and then we get a certain distance into it, and we realize it's a bigger task, or there's more to it than I thought there would be.
Yeah. I think does that. I think that's why it's hard to separate this out from a lot of other things because I feel like you're touching on there is there's a fear associated with that. Like I'm
Yeah.
afraid of failing. I want to do this thing, and I'm afraid I'm going to fail at it. So why don't I just set it up so I don't feel so bad if that happens?
I think that's a huge, and I can see that, and you can see that with people. You can see it for students, especially anybody learning something new. You can see that drop off. We've all experienced, anybody who's ever taught anything, you can see that drop off. But in the professional world, it happens too. You like on a long project, you can just sort of start to feel that that drop off where it's like, well, I don't like to do this anymore. And that's, I think, really, really natural. So there's a couple different things to do. And those are two different scenarios. And those are there's two different reasons for lack of motivation there. I think a lack of motivation from a professional standpoint um, just has to do with like, I'm not doing anything rewarding anymore. I mean, motivation's really just reward. That's all it really is. Like, if you're motivated to do something, it's because the reward is worth it, or even or just the perceived reward is worth it. And so that's an interesting thing to realize, is like we want to do something because we think it's going to be rewarding. And what happens is ultimately, I think, is the reward isn't what we thought it would be. So if the thing that we're doing, if the task that we're doing is sort of short term and it's kind of a simple task, and we get to the end of it and the reward isn't that great, it's not that big a deal. But when we're doing a larger task and the reward isn't that great, it becomes more difficult. And then the switch has to come with like, well, why are you doing it to begin with? And that's when we get into what I like to call the process over the result aspect of it. I think people who are successful. Go ahead. Do you have a thought?
No, I was gonna
I heard
agree with
a
you.
gasp.
I think we could probably get into this later, but I know that I've noticed, at least with the students, there's like a few different stages that they go through, similar to what you were pointing at. And the middle one seems to be the most difficult. I think for professionals, the end one gets more difficult. For students, it seems to be that place when they get started, they're excited, and they start learning, and then their taste becomes more developed than their skill set. So
Mm-hmm.
you now can see where you're lacking, and you can see where it's going to take to get there. And I feel like that's where a lot of them hit a wall, at least from
Yep.
what I've noticed for
I
a fair bit of our programs.
I think that's exactly it. I think that's extremely common. I thought of it when I was learning. Well, when I was learning animation specifically, the scariest thing was when I saw my work objectively. It was terrifying. It was absolutely necessary, but it's terrifying. And if you're just making art for art's sake, it doesn't matter. You don't see it objectively because it's just a self-expression thing. But when you're learning a skill set as a trade, it becomes very, very scary. So I had a student one time that asked me, she said, is self-doubt just part of the process of learning this stuff? And I said, it's not. Well, I thought about it first, but I concluded that it's not only part of the process, it's one of the most important parts, because what self-doubt is affording you is the understanding that you know the difference, between like good animation or whatever. You see the craft now and you go, this is the pinnacle of what it means to be exceptional at this craft, and this is me. Like before, it's all lumped in. Like if you don't know anything about music, you don't know the difference between a virtuoso and um, somebody who plays music around a campfire. They're just musicians. But as you learn music, you go, oh, there's a vast difference there. And so, for me, what I remind students specifically is that is a really helpful piece of information. You now know the difference. And it's a very difficult piece of information because the difference is very, very stark and you're very frightened about it. And what I notice with students is you can be surprised by it. You can be worried about it. You can be distracted by it, all of these things. But the ones that really get stuck are the ones that get discouraged by it. And the reason why they get discouraged by it isn't because they see the difference and they see the mountain they have to climb. It's because they don't know what to do. about it.
Right.
And the answer to that is deceptively simple, which is just do more of it. That's
Right.
it.
Well, to be clear, it's
When
not easy, but it's definitely simple.
no, yes, that's very difficult. I sort of use the analogy of like you look off in the distance and you see a mountain and you think, I'm going to go climb that mountain. It's this big. And you go, all right, I'll go climb it. I'll be home for dinner. And the closer you get to it, the bigger it is. And you're like, oh shit, that's way bigger than I thought it was going to be. And you get closer and closer and closer until you get to the base of it. And you're like, oh, I can't climb this. That's super, super hard. I'm going to have to go back and rethink it. Now there's one of two things you can do. You can go, that's not for me. That's perfectly reasonable. Or you can go, I'm going to go make a plan, maybe buy some ropes, whatever. I'm going to learn how to do this.
Maybe hire one of the Sherpas from CG Spectrum.
Maybe get someone. Maybe I'll go rent a helicopter, or
Yeah.
or maybe I'll climb the first 200 feet and then come back down again, and do it that way. So you just the closer you get to your goal, the bigger it is, and that's just how it goes. And you'll never get to the end of it. But the wonderful thing about when you get to this point where you're like, I'm not where I want to be, and my efforts, the discouragement comes from like, I believe that I've exerted the right amount of effort to be further along and I'm not. So this isn't for me. And so you have this belief system where like, I think that's a reasonable amount of time and energy that I've put into this, and I still stink. Possibly.
Yeah, well,
but
I think the hard one for everybody is it's not.
It's absolutely is not. And it's different for other people. I've seen people who just they just catch on to it and they just run with it. And a lot of those people are no less frustrated. They're just dealing with their frustration sort of differently. I find people that have learned hard things in the past are way more equipped to learn new things. So I had a student, she was a veterinarian. How do you say it? Veterinarian? That's not an easy trade to get into. And she was a working veterinarian, and she liked animals, didn't like animal owners, which is reasonable.
That's a common trade among veterinarians.
Yeah. I don't, anyways, so she wanted to, stretch a bit. So she started animating, and she'd never done it before. And as I would give her notes, she would apply them, and with varying degrees of success, but she was steady. Like she just seemed to have an underlying confidence of like, I trust myself that I will be able to sort this out when I need to sort this out. And so she just kept plugging away at it. Whereas a lot of students some of the younger students that I have that have just gone, like maybe just finished high school or did a couple of years of college or whatever, they have a different pattern where they start it and then they go, and they just sort of drop off. And they're like, I can't come this week. They start to sort of vanish a little bit. I lose them for a couple of weeks and they come back and they're a little sheepish. And if I lose them for more than 2 weeks, I know they're not going to come back because they're embarrassed, this sort of thing. And they haven't really figured out how to learn. And the way to learn is to just, there's something in there that you need to be able to trust yourself, that if you just push through the fear, the distraction of the fear and the discouragement, and just do a little something every single day, what ends up happening is that you stop caring about the reward, which is the result of your work. You stop caring about that because you're solving problems real time. And that becomes your thing. That becomes your kink. That becomes like, it's when the process at the beginning, it's the result is over the process, right? People will students will do a bouncing ball and they'll go, look, and you go, yep, it's a bouncing ball. And I'm like, but it's the best bouncing ball. And it's like, well, it's a bouncing ball. Pretty, like, it's not a difficult thing to do. Like, that's a low bar, but great. I'll encourage you to like do 1,000 bouncing balls, make a bowling ball or whatever. They go, oh, you can do different bouncing balls. And then it starts to grow. But as it gets more and more sophisticated, it gets more and more complex. And so the ones that really click onto it, they come to me and they don't go, look at this great thing that I did and give me like the feedback to tell me that I'm going to be good, I'm going to be okay. Instead, they come to me and they go, hey, these are the areas that I'm struggling with. And I'll look at it and go, ooh, that's pretty good. It's like those students, their work is further along, it's more sophisticated. And then because now they've gone deeper into it, because the more you do something, the further you see. And so your sophistication over what you're doing becomes deeper and deeper. And the general public doesn't know the difference between a Saturday morning cartoon and a Pixar movie, really, as far as like the craft goes. They just see color and shape and light. But for people who are learning the craft, the real audience is the masters of that craft. Like I'm an animator. I don't animate for an audience, for a general audience. I animate for other animators, because those are the ones who I'm going to be communicating with. Those are the ones who decide whether or not I continue animating. That's my audience, are other craftspeople.
Because you have the general public, they just announced there's a Coco Melon movie coming out, and that's definitely not the pinnacle of animated excellence there. So you're definitely not animating for that setting. But I think the one thing I think students would probably push back on with this conversation so far would be like, okay, basically it's coming down to you just need to keep doing it. But how to, and that's easy for us to say because we kept doing it and got through, but how did they start that process? Or would it be helpful for us to talk about maybe the strategies that we used or other people could use to get through
that? I think that's a really good point. And you touched on it earlier about as students sort of move along you talked about their taste that is being
outpaces the skill,
outpacing their skill set. And I sort of see that at that point, not even necessarily at that point. I don't know if there's a correlation here, but I see a big mistake that a lot of students make is scope creep, right? So they come to this with like it's a creative enterprise, modeling, lighting, all that sort of stuff. You're like, so I find a lot of the students who come here, they feel like they have something to say, and this is the way they want to say it, and they have big ideas, reasonable, but the ideas are good, maybe like I want to do this thing, and it's like, that's a great idea. That's like a team of 7 for 2 years. Like to pull that off. Like I'm going to animate this truck stops and these guys get out and they're going to rob a bank, and inside the bank and blah, blah, blah. Like what you're just killing yourself. And they get into it and they get like a week into it or whatever. And it's the same thing. They're driving towards the mountain, it's like that mountain's way bigger the closer you get to it. So what I really, really, really recommend, and I've had plenty of conversations with successful animators about this, is like, what did you do to get from being a student to a professional? What was the and this is animators specifically, what was the secret? And I've heard this more than one time, was like short pieces. What you animate over 30 frames, 1 second, you can animate over 3,000 frames, whether or not you had the time. I don't, as an animation recruiter, somebody who's hires still to this day, I hire animators, rarely fire them, but sometimes, no. But I hire animators I don't need to see more than like 10 seconds of work to judge whether or not I think you can do the job. Then if I meet you, we just got to make sure that we have the same flavor of crazy so we can work together. Right. But I don't need to see much. I watch this stuff all day, every day. I can see really, really quickly whether or not you're there or not. So I don't need to see a story. I don't need to. I don't need to read a cover letter to tell me about how important animation is to you and how you grew up with the cars or whatever the hell it is. I don't need to know any of that kind of stuff. I just need to show me 40, 50. Like for me, like anything that I'm doing, any personal work that I'm doing that goes beyond 80 frames, I just know I'm not going to do it. Like I'll have an idea and I'll sit down to animate on my spare time, and I'm like, this is a great idea. And we have thousands of great ideas because they just all exist already. We're just pulling them out and going, that's a great idea. And that's wonderful. But if I'm going beyond 80 frames of animation, I'm not even going to bother because it's just going to bum me
Right.
out. I'm going to get like halfway there and I'm going to be like, oh, this is also very shiny. And I'm going to get distracted and I'm going to lose my motivation. And I don't need to do it because I have other things that are scratching my itches for like creativity, or I have a job to do that also satisfies me and I like it. So I'm not hungry to make a 3,000 frame masterpiece. So what I say to students all the time is like, if you're getting discouraged, animate something that you can do today and just set yourself 4 hours and go, I'm going to animate this character. It's going to be a 40 frame jump cycle and it's going to be hilarious. And this thing's just going to jump and jump. Just do that and do it until you're like, okay, that's not bad. And remind yourself that you can do stuff. Just do it. Just do it like a really short piece. And then you can go to bed and sleep at night. And when you get up, you'll be excited to look at it again. I've done this so much. And you get up and you watch it again. And I'll animate like 40 frames of animation and I'll just sit back and chuckle at it for like 2 hours and just let it sort of wash over me. I'm like, there it is. Look at me.
Well, it's really where I don't know if it made the cut, but we're channeling your Marcus Aurelius there with basically the ability to see reality for what it is and not trying to shoot beyond that. Like, this is what I'm capable of successfully doing, and I'm going to stick with that and not just completely, dream about something that is likely not possible for me at this stage, and or just for a single person to do, and then to get really discouraged about that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Have you been reading Marcus Aurelius?
I have read his book. Yes, he has the
Hmm.
diary on meditations. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah. He's like the godfather of Stoicism. Is that the
Yeah,
is that kind of the thing? Yeah.
he did a lot of thinking back then. It's definitely not
What do you?
woke, let's say, but it's a product of its time, certainly.
Yeah.
But there's definitely some good thoughts.
I just read a great book. I thought it was a great book called "The Courage to Be Disliked," and it's based on Adlerian psychology.
Mhm.
Which the overarching theme is like every problem that you have in your life has to do with interpersonal relationships, which for me that's probably rings true, but I don't know enough about psychology to really say that's a true statement. But one of the things that they talk about in that book that I find very, very helpful is they talk about tasks. And a lot of people get hung up on, they forget what their task actually is. So, for example, I had a student who was asking me, how do I, when I'm working at a studio, how do I climb the ladder? How do I network? These were his words. How do I network?
Yep.
How do I, you know, move forward in this studio? And for me, that was just a really, really good example of somebody who's thinking outside of their task. It's not your task to climb the ladder. It's not your task to network. The getting moving forward at your in your career, further in your career, is just a natural progression of doing your task to like the best of your ability, where everybody can trust that that's where your focus is. But if your focus is like, I want to be higher up in this company, if that's your focus, nobody's going to trust your intentions, because your intentions aren't really to make the best product or to make, let's say, to serve the production that you're on. You're 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 just trying to move forward, which means you don't you don't care about the production. You just care about you. And so what happens is you end up stagnating. And I think the same thing is for students. They forget what their task is, and your task as a student is to show professional animators that you too are a professional animator, if that's what it is you want to do. Now, I've had
Yeah.
students that have come here that are like, I don't care about being a professional animator, I just want to learn how to do this. It's rare, but I have that. I'm like, that's fine. But
Yeah.
most of us are coming here to go like, I want to do this professionally. I'm like, okay, then show me you can animate A to B.
Well,
Jeremy,
and a lot
what
of
do you
that
do?
stuff, I think, is just jumping ahead, right? Like, if as an animator, if you are, you have other aspirations as well. I would think, as it was in modeling as well, like doing the job well naturally leads to the other things. Like, if you're going to be a successful animator, you need to learn how to interact with the rigging department and learn how to tell them what you want and give feedback to them, and also receive what they've said without getting upset about it, and interact with the technical animation department and take notes really well. And so if you do that well, all of those things will start to come out of it. The people in the rigging department will be like, oh, I'm going to start going to this person. People in the, it just starts to happen as you
Mhm.
do that one thing really well.
Yeah, it's good for you. It has its rewards are very substantial. I have this anecdote about I was working on a small film, one of those like direct to DVD things. I won't say what it is because the animator I'm going to talk about it would know who I'm talking about. But anyways, there's a small film, and I was a supervisor on it, and I had this one animator on my team who just was like not into it,
Yep.
just wasn't doing the job. And so I went over and I said, hey, what's going on? You're not really, you just don't seem like you're producing. You kind of got a dark cloud over your head. And he said, this movie's stupid. And I said, well, they're all stupid. They're movies. Like there's like millions of people without fresh
We're not
water in the
saving
world. Like,
lives.
no, they're all inherently stupid. They're millions of dollars going towards, distracting people from understanding how terrible everything really is. I don't know. But anyways, I said, don't worry about the movie. Just concentrate on the 60 frames or 80 frames, whatever the hell it is, because you never really have more than a second or two on your plate at any given time. I'm like, just make those 60 frames today the best you can make them. Like, you came all this way, like you commuted into work and you came in here. Why would you sit down and be all chagrin about it? Like, why would you do that to yourself? You don't have to do that. He's like, it's dumb. I don't want to blah, blah, blah. What do I tell my friends?
But I
Well,
always have
if you don't start doing the work, you're going to have to ask them for money, like, so you don't want to do
I know.
that.
Well, there's always an interesting thing about that. I want to say, like, I see both sides, but there's this
Mm-hmm.
thing where I think, especially right now, the animations and gaming industries are in a bit of a tough spot.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't condone places that, abusing their workers, not treating them well, overworking them.
Right.
But then there's also the other side of, you're getting paid pretty well to sit here and make cartoons all day.
Yep.
We could be building railroads or houses, or but
Yeah.
you're not. We're just sitting at a computer. Essentially, for the most part, people are having fun doing this, and there is a portion of, like, we're fortunate to be able to do that I think gets lost sometimes as well.
Yeah, which I think is also reasonable. Like, nobody, I think about that quote, like, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And I've always had a weird relationship with that quote because I'm like, well, nobody loves what they do that much
Right.
that they don't like when your options have been squeezed down into like, well, this is what I do whether I like it or not. There's going to be days where you're like, well, I feel like not. And the the way to kind of fortify yourself against that, or the way that I found to fortify myself against that, is I just do, like, I just make sure that I'm killing it as much as I can possibly kill it. So when I don't feel like it, I just call into whoever I don't, just send a note to whoever I don't feel like doing it with that day. And I said, I don't feel like it today. And people will give me that because they trust me. Like if I've built up that rapport, if I haven't, I can't do that. So I try to build that rapport up as much as I
Yeah, they've
can.
actually
But
done studies around this, and if the ideal spot is about 20% of your time. So if you can spend about 20% of your time on tasks that they call it like tasks that strengthen you, not necessarily tasks that you like, but tasks that you're good at and are excited about and feel fulfilled by. So if you can
right.
do that for out of your 8-hour day, at least 2 hours, then usually you can put up with the rest of the stuff that you might not enjoy. So that might be a way to kind of kickstart things if
Oh,
you're feeling
that's interesting.
down about what you have to do.
I've always had this theory that Tuesdays are the worst day of the week. And my theory goes like this. Uh, Mondays, people usually say it's Mondays, but I'm like, Mondays are okay because you're coming off your weekend and you get to go to work and you get to lie about how great your weekend was to everybody.
Yeah,
Wednesday's hump day, which is kind of has its own little charm. Thursday's like it's basically Friday because Friday everybody's like already kind of weekending in
yep,
spirit. Saturday's wonderful. Sundays kind of suck. Sundays are sort of like they're almost like a Tuesday in that it's like, and I blame public school because Sundays to me are like there's a feel. The songwriter John Prine had this song lyric that said it felt just like a Sunday on a Saturday afternoon. And I'm like, oh yeah, I know what that feels like. There's this like impending doom because I never did my homework or whatever. But Tuesdays are the day where you're just in it, right? You just can't, there's no denying that this is my life. And I remember going to work on a Tuesday one time going like, holy crap, this is me now. Like, so
yeah,
it's that thing of like, or it's that saying like, you'll never work a day in your life. I'm like, now you're making me feel bad for feeling like I don't want to do this thing that I really quite enjoy mostly. But then when I don't
right.
enjoy it, now I feel like a schlum. Like, what's
Like
what's
I'm
the matter
working
with
now. I
you? I
failed.
remember,
Yeah,
dude. I remember like I was I had a short stint as a musician at a very reasonably high level. I mean, actually, a very high level where we were playing like arenas and stadiums and stuff. I couldn't
nice.
believe it. I'd worked at it for a number of years, and suddenly there I was in a tour bus, uh, getting out. There's people like helping me like open doors, like it just was this. And I'd walk out onto the stage, and somebody would hand me a guitar, and there was like literally 30,000 people there, throwing water bottles at me and stuff. Anyway, I mean, I was a musician in backing somebody up who was actually talented. So they weren't there for me specifically. Doesn't matter. And in case anybody's Googling whether or not I was famous, I wasn't. But anyway, it was amazing. It was like at first. And then I remember after about 2 years of it, and then it really only lasted about that long because that's the average time you get to do that kind of thing. I just remember walking out on the stage, and it was like a music festival in the summer at like Thunderbird Coliseum in Vancouver, Canada, and walking out, and it was like this. We were playing with like the big rock stars, like a Foo Fighters and Green Day. All these guys were on the bill, and I just remember being out there, just being kind of like ho hum about it, and I was
Right.
incensed with how is that possible that even this can be like I'd like to have a day off. Like I'm just like, yeah, all right, I'll play the yeah, here you go. Are we done yet? And one more? Jesus, this it's going forever. Like
Yeah.
I'm watching the clock at work when I'm standing in front of 30,000 adoring fans. I'm still like, is it lunchtime yet? you know?
Right.
So it's just like
But
it's
I think that happens with
inevitable.
everything, though, right? It's like the first time you get
Exactly.
your name in the credits, you're very
Oh
excited.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
The 30th time, meh.
No, no. So
Did you
it's
see the
like
movie?
going, right. I haven't seen most of the films I've worked on. And I think that's probably
Exactly.
fairly common. Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
I have students go like, "You haven't seen The Hobbits?" I'm like, "No, it's not my thing." Like, I
Right.
like the doing thing, like in a studio with other animators and creators and stuff. That's fun. It's like, hey, what do you got for this? Check this out. What do you think? That kind of thing's fun. Like the building of it, the process of it, I'm really get a charge over. I really get a charge over working with people, bouncing ideas off, getting into arguments.
Yep.
That's like, I'm drawn to conflict. But I'm not really, I wouldn't consider myself to be provocative. I don't provoke conflict. I think probably you would agree. We've known each other for quite some time, but when there
Mhm.
is conflict, I'm like, oh, let's
We're
get
doing
into
this.
this. You were doing this. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm not combative either. I'm just like, I'm a pretty good listener. But anyway, um, as I say, as I just keep talking,
But
I'm really a
for
good listener.
for
If you
students,
hear me talk enough, you'll know that.
but for yeah, for students watching this, I guess how can we get that? Give them some tools that would be useful for them to do that. I think at least what I'm hearing from you, and it's similar to my experience as well, of like the outcome probably shouldn't be your goal if we're talking about being as close to, the closer you get to reality, the happier you'll likely be with this.
Mhm.
The outcome really can't be the goal. I mean, one, because like both of us have not seen a lot of the things, we haven't seen the outcome of our work. And for
Right.
people whose movies get canceled, for games that get canceled, for you work on it for years and nothing gets shelved, you
Oh
can
yeah.
never show anybody, you can never talk about it,
Yeah.
and that's a real thing. But if you can have fun along the way and figure out how to enjoy, each day of just doing it, I think that's where that'll keep you going much longer than if you're always looking to this end state that you're
Yeah.
trying to get to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I find this with university students specifically, not so much the CG Spectrum students, but with my university students. They the way that the system is, it loads them up
Right.
with all kinds of work, and then it gives them an arbitrary letter and says, this is an A, this is your goal. And it's
Yep.
in art, and it's sort of arbitrary because people learn at different, you know, um, well, they have different learning curves. And so I have students come up to me and say, how do I get an A? And I'm like, I always ask them, why do you want one? What's the point of it? And they say, well, it would make my mom happy. I'm like, well, buy her some flowers. I don't know what to tell you. Like, the question is, how do I get to be a better animator? There's an A locked in that question, or in the answer to that question. There's an A in there for sure, but you're chasing the wrong thing. You're not looking towards getting, and university too is like, I was talking to a student the other day, and I said, why are you loading yourself up so much? And she said, I just need to get out of here. I'm like, well, that's a weird goal for your education.
Mm-hmm.
Is like, I'm going to get done as fast as I possibly can. And I'm like, that's the goal. Secondary is, and if I get a job out of it, great. So it's a weird,
Right.
well, it's not, I shouldn't say it's weird. It's obvious, and it's a reasonable place to put your priorities, but it's wrong. So for tools for young people to learn, what I'm getting at is like, try not to make, what happens is everything gets set up as like a unwanted task. It's like, oh, I got to get this off my plate, and it just becomes like this thing that you have to do reluctantly. It's not something that you enjoy doing. So it doesn't set you up to enjoy it. It sets you up to, as a, like, you have to do it. And so you immediately start to build this negative relationship with it. And then when you do it, some jackass like me comes along and says, you did it wrong. And so you get this negative feedback loop, right? So every time you try, the only feedback you're getting is that you're bad at something that you desperately want to get good at. And that gets very, very difficult. So quieting that stuff. When I was in school, I asked them not to grade me, and they said they had to. And I said, then go ahead and do it, but I don't want to see them, because grades just confused me. Because I would start to feel good about what I was doing, and then I would see the grade. It would be like a C minus. I'm like, that makes me, you're sucking away my energy, my the I think the most obvious criteria for getting good at something that you don't know how to do is your enthusiasm around the doing. And educators know that. Everybody knows that, like, if you're enthusiastic about it, you'll learn it better, faster, and more of yourself will come out in it. But the way the education system works, it works counter to that a lot of times. It's punitive, right? You start with an F, you earn an A. These sorts of things. It's punitive and it's distracting. It's like you think you're starting to like this, and then somebody says, "Well, no, you shouldn't like it because you're bad at it still," and you're not getting any helpful information on how to get better. You're just getting this confirmation that you're not good, and that gets very, very difficult. So as a student, it's really, really important to understand, like, what is it that you're really trying to do, and what it is ultimately, I would say, that you're really, really trying to do when you start to learn something new is you're trying to find what you love about it, not in the result of it, but what you love about sitting down and applying yourself to that. Find that thing that you like, and understand, like, as a consumer, because one of the biggest mistakes I think students make is that they forget they're the consumer. As the consumer, you're paying for it, so it's within your best interest to find the thing that you like about it. You wouldn't pay $60,000 for an automobile and then call the dealership every day to ask if you can use it and how to use it. You would use it because you paid for it. So the same thing is with the craft that you're learning. So to come to me and say, I love students that come to me and say, I'm not getting enough, and I have questions about this, and I need you to answer them, and I need you to be like as fast as you possibly. It doesn't mean being disrespectful. It doesn't mean, again, with the car analogy, it doesn't mean that you drive the thing into the ground. You care for it, but you also make sure, like, if it's not running properly, you take it back. You don't go, oh, my $60,000 car doesn't run properly, but I don't want to bother the dealership. Bother the dealership. Advocate for yourself. Get involved with it. Take control of it. It's hard because you're getting this feedback that you're not good at it, and the thing that discourages us is that we lose control. It goes back to the thing I was saying earlier, Jeremy, about, like, not knowing what to do about it, feeling out of control. And the thing to do about it is just to take responsibility for it. And the best way I know how to do that is to just do small things. Do little things that you can achieve. You get that little reward mechanism in your head that you do have a result that you go, okay, that's moving forward. I do this visualization exercise where none of us know where when our best work is. We'll know when our best work is if we take a minute before we take our very, very last breath and do a category and go, like, I guess it was in 1987 or whatever the hell it was. Whatever. You'll find it then, but you'll never know it until then. And most of us will die before thinking about it, so we'll never know it. But what I like to think about is I visualize this idea that my best work is just out here waiting for me to come get it. It exists because it does. It's there. Whether how far I go to find it is up to me, but it exists. And in between me and it is just more work, right? So it's like this big, long, I visualize it as this big, long sort of tunnel of sludge, and I'm just pulling the garbage away and pulling the garbage away. So every time I animate something, I've pulled more things away, and I've pulled more things away, and this thing starts to become more and more in focus. That way I can just move forward.
Time to get dirty.
Somebody told me about, there's this trick that I don't know, I think Green Berets or some celebrated ass kicking people type war people. There's a visualization process that I think the Green Berets do. And what they do is, if they're injured and they've lost use of their legs, I think was this exact analogy, and they need to crawl back to wherever they're going, and it could be 6 miles to help. What they do is they reach as far in front of them as possible, and they draw a line with their finger, and then they pull themselves to that line. And when they get there, they reach forward and they draw another line, and they concentrate on that journey rather than the mountain. They concentrate on, like, these little steps, which is the exact same thing. It's the exact same
I was going to ask,
visualization
is that
exercise.
what you used for being a musician? Because that's also something that's a very long road, um, very talent, but a lot of luck plays into the variable of success in the music industry. So,
Yeah,
and it's an
yeah.
artistic pursuit. So I was curious what got you through that to get to that successful stage.
Well, it was a different time, and I was young enough to think that I could. I was naive enough to think
Sure.
that I could. I
But I
could do
assume
that.
at some point you hit that stage we were talking about where it's like, oh, I'm here and actually I need to be way up there.
Yeah, yeah. I think um I don't really know actually what I was thinking, to be honest. I just was drawn to it. And somebody asked me one time, the animation was the same. So when I was when I was when I was in animation school, I had a 1-year-old daughter and another one on the way. And wasn't independently wealthy, and I was taking out student loans to survive, um and I was working part-time, and I had all of these things going on in my life. And I had a young woman ask me, like, how did you do it with all these other things that you were doing at the same time? Like, how did you do it? And so I started to sort of talk to her about like the nuts and bolts, like, well, I had a schedule and a blah blah blah. But really, over the overarching sort of philosophical answer is, you couldn't have stopped me if you tried. And that's the truth. And I made a lot of mistakes. I think I got frustrated and stressed out more than I needed to. Those are all the sort of the things I learned through that process. Is I put the people closest to me through hell, because I'm like, uh, I don't get it, and this sort of stuff. But ultimately, with the music thing and the animation thing, um, I just I just couldn't be stopped. There was just no way. And um, I get fueled. I don't know if would be helpful for anybody else, but I get fueled less by people that I love that encourage me, and more by people that I love who discourage me. Like people that come to me who love me and care about me, going like, "Hey, man, one on one, I think it's time you shut this thing down. Like, it's enough already. I don't think
Right?
this is good for you.
You're going to
I
prove them
don't think you're
wrong.
going to be able to." I had a friend of mine, right? I had a friend of mine tell me, like, "You'll never feed your family like this." I'm like, "Oh, thank you. I love that." Like, it doesn't
Yeah,
worry
it's
me or
on.
scare me, because who knows? Like, people, yeah, exactly. Um,
Yeah,
I'm driven by that stuff,
but I would
and
say
sometimes like wrongly driven.
right. Well, that's where this is
It's my
interesting. Is
like
I
it's
think
they
people
might
are
be right.
looking for anybody watching this looking for like motivational tips or things you can do. I would say
Yeah,
it's a bit different for everybody, and I think there's a lot of different
100%.
tools you can employ, and you should employ them. But there's definitely not a one size fits all. Because I'm a little bit like you, but not maybe to that extreme. I think if I had everyone coming to me telling me I was just gonna fail miserably, might have had a hard time with it. But like, it was something I knew I wanted to do, and I don't know. There was just never of like I didn't. There was nothing else I wanted to do. It's like this is what I want to do, and I'm going to do this, and I really like doing it. So I just kept doing it, and I was, as most people are, I was pretty terrible at it at first, and you just go and go and go and
Hmm.
slowly get better. Um, for me, and this took me a while, so I would definitely. I'm hoping students have a lot more information now. They can learn this stuff a lot faster than we did. Was
Hmm.
because of like I had some health issues at the time. So for me, I was like, I need something stable and I need health insurance. Like we're in the U.S. Health insurance is a thing here. I wanted to be somewhere where I could be employed and have health insurance and still do what I liked. So for me, it was like, okay, realistically, how can I do that? I was like, I need to enjoy the things that other people don't like. So I started looking into that, and what artists don't like is for the most part, is solving technical problems. So I started getting, more into that, and came around to like what I really like about this. And for those that don't know, I was in modeling. I like solving problems for people and fixing things. And that problem could be, hey, we need this creature made, so you need to figure out what this looks like. But it could also be a technical aspect of it, or something where we're needing to build something together, or make new tools, or to make something more efficient, things like that. And I think finding that allowed me to keep pushing, and it also helped me, achieve those goals. But the pushing part, and what we didn't stop, was, I would say, almost out of fear. Like, I wanted to be in a place where I wanted to do this, but I had these certain things that I needed to do. So, to your point, Mark, of like, how did you do this with all this family? Could you say there was a portion of that you did it because of that? Like, you're almost putting yourself into a place where you can't fail and you have to do it. It's there's a saying like burn the boats. And it's kind of like that. There's no way to go back, and you just have to keep moving forward. And I'm not saying that's for everybody, but that can be a tool to keep pushing you through those times when you're not necessarily excited to do it every single day. Like,
Burn the
this
boats.
is what I want to do. I don't have a backup.
Oh,
well, that concept, when the conquistadors pulled up and then they burned all the boats behind them, like, there's no way out. You have to do it. And that was one way I motivated myself when I didn't feel like it, or when I was tired, or whatever. It's like, if this is what I want to do, I don't really have a backup for this, and I need these things to, survive. So I'm just going to get up and do it. And I'm not saying that's for everybody, but I think that definitely can be a push when nothing else will. And I was curious to ask you, like, that teacher, or the woman asked you, how do you do this with your kid and all that stuff? Could part of that, I mean, it's almost like you did it because of that. Like, because you have all these things, you have to stay organized. And because you have all these things, you have to strategy your time, and you have to get it in fast. And you can't, like, hang out because you've got all these other responsibilities to manage.
That's such a great point. A couple of years ago, I have 4 children, which is like, I don't recommend that. It's right out of the gate. But anyway,
if you want to look forward to Monday,
that's just like, fill your house full of children. They're wonderful people. But somebody asked me not too long ago, a couple of years ago, a friend of mine asked me, like, why did you have kids? And the proper answer is like, oh, I wanted more joy in my life, or whatever people say, right? Oh, I wanted to, like, this is like a thing, or whatever. And that doesn't discount that answer, but there's a lot of answers you're supposed to say. But the answer that popped into my head at that moment, and it was honest, was I needed to do something to take options away, to focus me, right? Because at the time, like, well, I was a touring musician. I didn't want to do that anymore, but I didn't know how not to do it. And I also like to film things, and like make, like, I would write treatments for music videos for other artists and stuff. Nothing that ever stuck. But anyways, I had all this kind of, I was sort of just floating around, which now sounds awesome, actually. But at some point, I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore, and I don't know how not to do it. Oh, there's my excuse. Hey, are you still on tour? And I have friends and families who hear me on the radio or see me on TV and stuff like that. And they were like, hey, how come you're not doing that thing anymore? Which made it seem like I was failing. But then if I could go, oh, because I have this anchor now, they go, oh, that makes sense. It was a get out of jail free card.
Congratulations.
Right. Yeah. Sure. It's weird that it saved me from a wonderful, seemingly wonderful career. And then, so when I got into animation, I wasn't wasting time at all. I knew, like, I had this window of, like, and my partner, she would say, because now we had one and another one coming, and my son was born while I was still in school. Then she would say, "These are the hours with when you work on your stuff, and these are the hours that I need you.
Yep.
And when you're not working on your animation, I don't want you still to be working on your animation. Like when we're having dinner, I don't want you to just sit there
Right.
and be closed off to us. Like you have to make."
Thinking
So
about it.
we just made that bargain, and it's no different than just scheduling. But there is a mental, like there's a I think well, not a mistake, but I think what a lot of young people are still learning is like you have to sit down and think about who you are and what you want to do, and actually take the
Yeah,
time.
absolutely.
It could be meditating, it could be whatever, but actually sit down, give yourself a little bit of time. Every day would be great, just to sit down and go, who am I exactly? And what is it that I'm going to do? And then you visualize it. And when I go to work, I do this for years when I go into the university, but when I used to work at studios and stuff, and I'd walk up and I just have this exercise where when I put my hand on the door of wherever I'm about to walk into and be, I look at my hand on the door and say, if you're going to do this, it's very dramatic, but I say to myself, if you're going to do this, you're going to
This
do
sounds
that.
to be a good reality show.
Yeah, you're going to do this. You're going to it's going to be a positive experience for you and for everybody else. If you're going to walk through this door, don't walk through the door reluctantly ever, if you can. I mean, I
Yeah,
have,
you're
but
framing it for yourself, right? It's a
right,
place to
exactly.
start
And
from.
it's not, it's good for you. And so there's some days where I grab the door and go, actually can't make that bargain today. And I go home. I've done it once, maybe twice, where I'm like, because I've come all this way and now I'm just going
Yeah.
to go back home again. But I just can't. I just know if I walk in here, I'm going to make people's lives miserable. I'm going to have to spend the rest of the week apologizing. It's just going to be bad. It's just going to be like everything would be better if I didn't do it. And so I don't do it. But I'm mindful about that. My daughter said to me the other day, she was complaining about a friend of hers, and that was a kind of a being kind of a funky dude. And I said, what do you think his problem is? And she said, I think he takes himself too seriously. And I hadn't really considered that. You hear people say that all the time. Are you taking yourself too seriously? But then
Right.
I countered that with, like, I don't think he's probably taken himself serious enough, because if you really take yourself seriously, you'll fix that stuff. Like, to take yourself seriously is to like allow yourself to be light, allow yourself to it's a really good default in life to be like stressed and lowbrow and worried and head down and working and like nobody bug me, that kind of stuff. That's an easy default, and it seems like the most rational default. But if you really take yourself seriously, you'll understand that that's bad for you and for everybody around you, and that you could do better. I love these guys. There's this guy here in town, and he's dresses in these. He's got this huge mullet, and he dresses in these really loud clothes, and he rides a bicycle, but he bounces on it. He goes sideways on it, like he's always just bouncing around town. I'm like, that guy
Yep.
takes himself seriously. Like he's just I don't know what he does for a living. I
Right.
don't know how he feeds
Not in
himself.
a not in a I'm in trying to express some version of my ego to the world. It's more well, those are people who are really magnetic too, right? Like I'm
Totally.
really comfortable in my skin. I know
Yep.
who I am. I know what I'm about. And you can be about that or not, and that's cool.
Right. Yep.
And I think those are the people that other people really like to be around. And to be clear, we're not advocating to have children to get through your animation school. But I do think having that can really provide a lot of, for people that don't have that, having something outside of maybe the goal, because you need both, right? Like I want the goal, I need the daily excitement. You need to learn
Mm.
to just enjoy doing the thing. The I kind of call these crafts. Like we're more craftsmen.
I
Fine art
would
is
say,
artists, but
yeah.
really we're for the most part you're going to be getting a job making something for someone else or expressing their vision. And yes, you can put yourself into it, but you're really paid to solve a problem for them. So
Yep.
You need to enjoy that. You need to enjoy the craft part of it, but you're not always going to. And
Correct.
at least for me, and it sounds like you had this too, having something that like just kicks you in the pants every day is a good way to push yourself through those times when you're maybe don't feel like it in the morning. So that can
like
be a strategy for the students that might be watching this.
It's like a schedule.
And I would think for students in school, you're paying a ton of money.
Yeah.
At least if you're in the U.S., if you're in Canada, Australia, to some places where education is not free, it's usually fairly expensive, and that can be something that you can use. Like that's maybe if your parents are paying for it, that's awesome that you have the resources to do that. But someone's going to have to pay that back, and that can be the thing that you can use. It's like I need to make it to make the best of this investment in myself, or that someone else is investing in me. And if you're just hanging out, watching Netflix all day, I mean, that's something you'll have to, I think, own up to yourself after when you're done.
Right? Someday you're going to be angry with you.
Yeah.
Someday that's going to be a bummer for you, which is just again, it's just another one of life's lessons, perhaps for you to learn, for anybody to learn.
Yep. Well, that's what we're here to do. I mean, I know we can't. There's certain things that just come with some age and experience, but we're trying to impart some of that to you so you can learn it faster than we did.
Yeah. I really think, I mean
the audience.
Yeah. Wait, there's an audience?
we hope anyway.
I really like to think about it sort of like in the Ted Lasso approach, where like I'm less interested with my students anyways. I'm less interested in them getting to be quality craftspeople because I don't have any control over that. I can't do that. Instead, what I do is I just try to meet them where they are and hear what they have to say, where their life is, show them why their work is working and why, and pinpoint the areas where they could use some more practice. It's always practice. It's only ever practice. It's not really knowledge. There's an amount of knowledge and questions up to a point, and that all the knowledge that you need happens quite quickly, and then it's just doing it. When I was in school, I kept buying books because my work sucked. So I'd buy these books to like sort of satiate the fact, like, well, I just need another book. I just need another book. And all what I realized was all of that stuff was just keeping me from the doing. And it wasn't until I did it that all the answers were there. And they were deceptively simple.
Yep.
It was in the end, it was I was making it more difficult and avoiding it because I didn't know what to do. And then in the end, it was just doing more of it. And that was it.
And I would say that happens with, I think, even just tutorials now. There's like a proliferation of tutorials online. I mean, once you get to a certain point, you might learn one few things, like a hotkey or a cool tip that you didn't know. But yeah, really, it's just about just doing it over and over and over in a practiced way. I think, as you said, being like self-aware about what you're doing. You need to do it and then look at it, not just do it and then move on to the next thing. I think and that's where mentors and instructors can help you do that. But
yeah,
and practice.
I think if you have an instructor, I think reaching out to them on a consistent basis. Like I love my students who are like, I'll see them once a week for an hour, but they don't stop there. They'll like 2 days later, they'll send me an update and I'll look at it and I'll give them some feedback. And then another day or two, they'll send me another update. And they always say, I hate to bother you. And I always say, like, it's literally how I feed myself. So don't worry about it. But the students that do that, their learning curve is just astronomically different than the ones that don't. The ones that don't, like after class, they might like finish the Q&A session with me and then go off and do something, and then come back to it 2 days later. A lot of people don't like to watch the Q&A sessions because they don't like to hear themselves or see themselves on camera. Not everybody's
Right.
as dashingly handsome as me. That's difficult.
Yeah, I know. We all struggle with that.
and then they end up doing the work like an hour before the class. Then they upload it. And so they're really only getting 2 hours a week out of it. And it's such a bummer because it's just so much of the resources are going towards this, and they're not playing their hand very well.
And that also isn't that's not what it's like, right? Like when you're in a studio, it's not a week between reviews. It's every day, sometimes twice a day, depending on how fast the production is moving.
Yeah, when I worked on a production,
we iterate. Even as a professional, you iterate, and that's how it improves.
Yep, it's the only way it improves.
Yep. Do you have any last parting words?
Do you know how to
stay on top of things?
You seem like a man, Jeremy, who can complete a Rubik's Cube. Can you?
I have absolutely no idea at all. I did one once with a hammer, and I ripped it apart and put it back together, and I solved it quite quickly.
Not as quick as somebody who can do it in 20 seconds or whatever.
30 seconds.
I don't know. It's sort of your.
I was pretty close. Once you get that first piece out, go back together pretty quick.
Nice. Yeah, I think that the answer to like how do you stay motivated is just very simply you don't beat yourself up about it.
Yep.
I mean, don't hurt yourself because it's impossible, and the game is set up to make you feel bad about not wanting to do the thing that you're supposed to want to do. I got bored playing music in front of 30,000 screaming fans. You can get bored doing anything. And I worked hard for that to get to that position. So it's just going to happen. And then once you're in that funk, just sort of appreciate, you'll get back out of it. And, it's easy when you have a job because you just do it because you got to do it because you get money at the end of it. But when you're a student, you schedule it, do all that kind of stuff. I mean, if your schedule isn't starving to death like my kids are, you go to jail. You don't feed children. You don't go to jail if you don't feed your schedule. But just make your schedule simple. Just like, I'm going to animate for 1 hour. And you can do an hour. You can turn off all the noise. You can turn off the internet. I had this thing where when I was learning to play music, there was no internet, but there was cable television. And the way that my TV was connected to my cable, I had to crawl through like this little entertainment center in my apartment, and I would unscrew it because I just needed to practice music throughout the day. And so I'd treat it like a job. I'd get up in the morning, I'd make myself an egg and a piece of toast, and I'd eat it. And then I'd unscrew. This is a true, like, you think you should be more disciplined than this, but I just knew myself, and I'd unscrew the cable box, and then I would take my coffee table and I'd turn it upside down. And then I would take all the cushions off my sofa and I'd put them in my bedroom. And then I would sit down, I'd play music, and then it would become noon. I would take a lunch break and I'd make some food. And the thing that I want to do when I make food is watch TV. But if I sit down and watch TV while I eat food, my lunch break is going to just go to 4:00. Yeah. So I go into my living room to eat my food, and my couch has no cushions on it, and my coffee table's upside down, and my cable thing is like,
it's just making it harder for yourself.
Playing music, and I did that for about 7 months. Yeah, just taking my distractions out of it, just leave them, and learning. When I was studying animation, there was still, the internet was at its infancy. There was no YouTube or anything that I knew of. There was I just didn't know anything about the internet, so I just animated. My computer wasn't even hooked up to the internet. I just would sit in my
I mean, at an extreme view, I guess that could be an option.
Office.
Disconnected from the internet, so you're not tempted to jump over to Instagram or something the moment it gets a little tough.
Oh, it's terrible.
Yep. Well, and
I did an interview.
Give yourself the ability to take the time to build that muscle, I think, as well. Like I remember when I was first starting freshman year in college, and I'd sit down and work on something. I was like, how on earth could anyone do this for 8 hours a day? And
Right.
you know, it was just slowly build that up. It's like, okay, now I can do it for 2 hours now. All right, oh, now I can do it for 4 hours. And I remember one day I sat there and
That's a
did
good
it
point.
for like 6 or 8 hours once, and I felt so proud of myself. I was like, I did this for 8 hours. And then you're like, oh, this is actually just a job. But
It's like your Everest.
no, yeah, it really was. But that takes time. Like, don't beat up on yourself if you're not, you know,
Sure.
graduating from high school and immediately jumping in and doing this 8 hours a day. Like that can take time to build that up for sure.
Absolutely.
But that goes back to what you said. You know, just forgive yourself.
Yeah,
Find the
joy. And that goes back to like being purposeful about your life. I talk to my university students about their love language, and I'm like, what's your love language? And none of them have one. I'm like, adopt one, man. Just like talk to yourself.
Yeah.
Like, be nice. I find that we typically we counsel our friends beautifully. Like, we have a friend who's going through a tough time. We're so caring and so like attuned and loving, you know, to a point, but we're pretty good at that sort of stuff. But when we make mistakes, our dialogue to ourselves is very harsh.
Yep.
Very, very harsh. So I just started doing this thing, and it felt silly at first, but I just started to speak to myself verbally and go, Mark, you're doing it. Come on, buddy. And that I would always laugh because it felt silly, but it was kind of fun. And I just started to like talk to myself and treat myself the way that I counseled my children.
I think they say as long as you're not answering, then you're in a good
spot. Oh, really? You're not supposed to answer?
That's where it gets a little weird.
I mean, yeah, no, I would never answer. Yeah, stop following me.
Right. But for those of you just joining us, if you're enjoying content like this and you'd like to see more, it would help a lot if you'll hit the like button. And if you want to get notified, the bell is great as well. And if you have more questions, we're always monitoring the comments and stuff. So feel free to drop us a question or comment down below. That would be great. And if you'd like to find out more, you can find our newsletter, link to the newsletter in the description below. Go ahead and sign up. We'll send you free stuff about different careers, advice, things we're doing, different events we're holding. It's a good way to stay in touch with all the happenings at the school and all the free things you can take part in. So thanks again for joining us.